Step into the Oracle Parlor, a podcast where those interested in witchcraft, psychic abilities, ghosts, and all things paranormal come to sip and spill the magical tea. This parlor is a space to grow by maintaining our curiosity over fear when it comes to the spooky and the paranormal. I'm your host, Jenny, otherwise known as Fantasma Witch. I'm a previous visual storytelling artist from animation, now full-time psychic witch, who is getting her MA in psychology to become a licensed therapist. Every other episode, I will share my paranormal experiences, different witchy experiences on a variety of topics, while other episodes, I will be talking with witchy guests of all backgrounds, from writers to artists to well-known social media witches, so we can learn about their practices and how they grew into their personal power. So get cozy and grab your tea. It's time to get mystical. Hello and welcome back, my mystical friends, to the Oracle Parlor podcast. This time we have I don't know if I would call it a Halloween special, because isn't every episode of the podcast kind of like a Halloween special at this rate? But I wanted to talk a little bit about, as you can tell in the title, parasitic entities. So, like always, I like to start my episode off by saying that the following is based off of my personal experiences as well as my current beliefs. I'm not here to convince you that I had these experiences or to make you believe what I believe, but to simply share my experiences with you. So, my beliefs may change from when I record this episode, but that's completely normal. And I will, like always, do my best to include any references that I may bring up during the episode in the description. And of course, if you have your own personal experiences with parasitic entities, with paranormal things of any kind, of any variety that you would like to share and have it read, possibly on the podcast, please feel free to send your stories to oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. So, like I said, because it's Halloween, I kind of wanted to be in the spirit of things and I wanted to share my experiences with the non-human entities, which is exactly what parasitic entities are. And we'll get into that in just one moment, but I really want to be clear first and foremost before we dive into my stories in this episode, because they are creepy and um, they can be off-putting, is that I want to be very, 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 very clear that I am not trying to scare anyone by discussing this topic and sharing my stories. That is not the point here. And you will see with each example that I give how, maybe not the exact details of how I overcame it, but that it is something that you can overcome and that you can navigate. And it's not something that has to rule your life, or it's not something to be afraid of, right? So I think it's really important that I share this information so we can understand how to navigate these kinds of things if and when they arise. So that way you know how to respond with courage as well as curiosity rather than reacting from fear. And that's what's really, really important. And the first thing that I really want to drive home. So, as I already mentioned, parasitic entities are non-human. So when we look at the breakdown of entity and parasitic, entity is non-human. Sometimes they may be a fragment of someone who was once human, but they are not resembling a human at this point in time that we are experiencing them. And parasitic is exactly what it sounds like. To quote the CDC, a parasite is an organism that lives on or in a host organism, and it gets its food from or at the expense of its host. And that really is what, in my experiences, parasitic entities really are, hence why we call them that. Because for one reason or another, depending on what they're feeding on, that is what they are doing. They're getting something out of the living in some way, in some shape, in some form, usually energy, usually emotion, to kind of feed themselves, to empower themselves. You know, um, And some spirits who have passed can act parasitic. So what I mean by this is, I personally do not ascribe to the belief that if you pass, you immediately become this enlightened individual as a whole. My beliefs are a lot more complex than that. So, without getting too much into the weeds on that topic, essentially, I believe that fragmentation can occur, and when fragmentation occurs, after we pass, that sometimes there's a piece of ourselves that's maybe not the most healed part, which is why I am such a big advocate for doing therapy while we are still around, to heal those aspects, to heal those parts of ourselves, to call those parts of ourselves back, and to do that healing shadow work and reclamation of self. So we're less likely to have this fragmentation issue, and I wouldn't even call it so much of an issue as something that can possibly happen. Again, when it comes to things like this, when it comes to the afterlife, when it comes to the paranormal, I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, but nobody can say for 100% certainty what is going to happen or 100% fact without a doubt. So these are just my personal beliefs. So, like I was saying, some spirits, when they pass on, they tend to act parasitic, but it's similar to living people. So, and this, if you've listened to my podcast before, you'll know that I often say that the spirits of past people are just the same as those who are living. Again, I don't believe there's this magical ascending purity that happens, you know. Um, and that when people pass on, they still can hold a lot of their opinions and their own personal beliefs and biases and judgments, and a lot of the negative stuff can still move on with them. And so this is where this can occur, where, an example of a living person being parasitic is someone who maybe that who unfortunately feels good about themselves when you're not feeling good about yourself, who revels in your failure, who tries to manipulate you to get you to do what they want you to do. This is what parasitic entities, as well as spirits who have passed on who act parasitic, it's the same idea. The only difference is they don't have a solid form anymore. So if someone who has passed has parasitic tendencies, it may just be more like they're trying to manipulate you to do certain things, to act certain ways for their benefit or entertainment. Sometimes it's literally like boredom and just trying to scare people just to like be entertained. But a parasitic entity, when we get to that level, they've kind of become so detached from their human side of themselves, the thing that made them human, that they kind of become this thing in this shadow of what once was, so far beyond shadow that it takes on a whole different, almost form. And one of the most intense experiences that I ever had interacting with a parasitic entity was surprisingly not at my childhood haunted home, not at my haunted apartment, but at my vet. So, a few years ago, my cat, late at night, somehow she got a little cut on her cheek. We have no idea how it happened. We still don't know to this day. And she looked really shook, and she had a little bit of an open wound. And so we decided to take her to the vet, to go get some antibacterial ointment or whatever they needed to do to clean her up and make sure she was okay. So it was late at night when we took her because this was like a 24-hour vet. And when we got there, there was nobody in the waiting room. There was nobody really working the front desk because it was late at night. It was low staffed. And so, um, me and my partner walk in, we drop off our cats, and they said, okay, if you need us, like ring the bell and we'll come running. So it's important that I explain the layout of this vet waiting room. So The vet waiting room is just this long room that has a TV on one wall, and at the front near the entrance is sort of like a check-in desk, and next to the check-in desk is a door, and that door leads to the whole clinic in the back. So the waiting room is just this front little, this long rectangular waiting area, and then everything else is behind the counter, behind a closed door. And behind this counter, you could clearly see over the counter and you could see through to the back area. So we could clearly see that there was nobody around. There was, you know, nobody hanging out to keep an eye on things just because, again, it was just so late at night. So me and my partner sit down in the waiting room and we're facing the TV. And so to the right is this check-in area that has this big open layout behind the desk, right? So we're sitting there. And as I'm sitting there, from the corner of my eye, I start to see something darting around in the back. Now, the weird thing was, I didn't hear any footsteps. I didn't hear any doors opening or closing. I didn't hear any shuffling. I could just see something very, very, very quickly darting around, almost like it was darting from the hallway to behind a desk to behind a filing cabinet, kind of like tucking away and hiding behind different things, darting between them. And when I say that I saw this out of the corner of my eye, I'm not talking about my inner eye. I'm not talking about clairvoyantly. I'm not talking about, oh, I can see a visual. No, I physically, with my physical eyes, I saw it physically with my eyes as if it was in the room. And so I didn't say anything at first because I wanted to try to get a better idea of what exactly I was seeing. And so I was kind of doing that trick where, how if you look at something, you can kind of like look off to the corner of your eye without actually moving your eyes to that area. Because every time I try to move my eyes to that area, it would, of course, dart away, and I couldn't ever get a clear view of it. So if I kept my eyes focused near the TV screen in front of me, but I maintained my actual attention on the corner of my eye, I could actually start making out some details. And I started to notice that this thing that I was seeing was only about 4 feet tall. It was kind of humanoid in shape, but for the most part, it looked like a muddy blur. It looked kind of like it was covered in like this thick layer of mud or goop or something. It was very, very, very bizarre. And so at about this moment, my partner noticed that I was looking in the same area, like because my eyes kept wanting to dart over and try to get a better look, but of course I couldn't. And I noticed that my partner was also doing the same thing as me and kept looking over in that area. So we kind of caught each other looking. And I said, "Hey, are you by any chance seeing something?" And my partner responded, "If you're talking about that muddy thing, then yes." And that's the weirdest thing is, and this is why I love having a partner who's also sensitive, is I did not at all talk about what I was seeing. I did not talk about what I visualized it to be, what I was physically seeing with my eyes. I just asked, "What do you see?" And they said the same exact thing I was saying. And so we decided to sit there in silence, as you do, and we were pretending just to not notice it. And we continued to watch it from the corner of our eye. Because the longer that we didn't acknowledge its existence, the longer that we actively chose not to look in the direction of where we were seeing it, the more active it got darting around the room behind the counter. And we started to actually hear what sounded like somebody moving around. But again, all of the vet staff was still in the back. And if anybody was coming out to that area, we would have heard a door open, we would have heard talking, we would have heard, no, we just heard movement because the floors themselves, it was the building itself was almost like raised, so it had like a hollow floor, so it was very loud if you walked around. So at first it was very silent, but eventually, the longer we stopped paying attention to it so directly, the more we could see it moving around, the more we could hear it. So we actually waited, me and my partner, we actually waited until we left the vet with our cat, which, by the way, like our cat was fine. They gave us a little bit of antibiotics. She just needed to wear a cone for like 2 days. It wasn't a big deal at all. So we had our cat, and on the way home, we started sharing what we saw and what we were correlating our stories. I saw that it was 4 feet. My partner agreed. They said it was muddy. That's exactly how I thought it looked. And so we just went back and forth talking about it. And my partner eventually asked me, what do you think it was? And I had already tapped into what I sensed it was while we were in the waiting room, just trying to ignore it. I was actually actively trying to ask my intuition, ask my higher self, my spirit team, what is this thing that's here at the vet? Like, what is this thing that I'm sensing, that I'm seeing? And what I got, what I sensed into was that this thing was a parasitic entity, and that this thing specifically was there to feed on the sadness and the stress that the animals were going through, which is really, really sad when I tapped into that and that was what I got. And so the interesting thing, as if it hasn't been weird and interesting enough, but the interesting thing is we actually had to go back to the vet the next day, like a day or so later. And I forget why we had to go back. It may have been for the prescription that they were giving us or something. And I told my partner, I said, I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to ask if anybody at this vet has had any experiences because yes, it's very validating to have your partner be able to confirm your experience in the moment as you're having that experience. Like it's absolutely amazing. And it really does help validate a lot of the psychic senses that I have. But I never had the opportunity to check in to see if other people outside of me and my partner have had these experiences, had sensed something. And so I really wanted to take the moment to try to seize that opportunity to just find out like, okay, what, you know, what's going on here? Has anybody seen or heard or felt anything in this location that would help to kind of further provide evidence that, yeah, there's something going on at this vet? And so we go back to the vet and I get to the checkout desk. And this checkout desk is behind the reception desk that we were sitting in front of. So, like the waiting room, the reception desk, and then the area behind the reception desk has a checkout desk near an exit door. So, we're on the other side and we're talking to the checkout uh, receptionist there. And I say to the checkout clerk, and I say, I know this is going to sound really weird, but do you or anyone else who work here, have you ever seen or experienced anything like paranormal or ghost related at all? And this person literally gasped and covered their mouth with their eyes wide. And they said, oh my gosh, why? Did you see something? And I said, why? Have you? And she admitted as soon as I had said, well, okay, hold on, wait, what is this reaction for? They actually admitted that they all experience things all the time in this location at this vet. And it wasn't just them, it was everyone that they worked with had some kind of strange experience. So, what they started telling me was that they would hear walking around, running around behind the reception desk area, which is exactly what we experienced, exactly what we saw. And they would hear things shuffling around, things moving around. They would hear um, and see things out of the corner of their eye. And then she tells me that one night while she was working by herself, the exit door, which is right next to the desk that she works at, which, by the way, this exit door is a really, really heavy metal door. And the hinges on it, not the hinges, but the like safety like thing for the door to make sure it doesn't slam, it's like kind of broken. So even for me and my partner, pushing that door open was always a pain in the butt because it was so heavy. And so the receptionist was telling me that one night while working alone, this door swung wide open and stayed open for a few seconds, and then it slammed shut. And then she tells me the thing with this door is not only is it exceptionally heavy, but the door is locked. So no one on the outside can open it. Only people who are exiting from inside can open the door because it's a safety precaution so people aren't entering through the wrong door. So somehow, not only did the heavy door open all by itself, hold itself open, but it did so from a side that's locked. When it happened, they said that they were so shocked that they actually ran outside to see if anybody was around, and nobody was there. And I just felt so validated. And it was great too to see that they felt validated in their experience as well when I told them. Because I did turn around and I said, yeah, me and my partner were here the other night, and this is what we saw, this is what we felt, this is what we heard. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's scary, but wow, it's so good to know it's not just us. And so I could tell that it was like really validating for them to have somebody who wasn't part of that network of, coworkers confirm a lot of the things without even having any indication about it prior. Now, before I move on to my next story, I will say I had posted this story on TikTok. I would say not long after it happened, like within a year of it happening. And one of the questions I got asked a lot when this video came out was, well, did you offer to cleanse the space? Did you offer to get rid of the parasitic entity since this parasitic entity was taking advantage of these poor animals and their stress and you know, their issues? And I always had to tell people, unfortunately, no, I did not. And there are a lot of reasons as to why I did not offer that. And a lot of them boil down to ethical reasons and respecting people's beliefs. And um, there's a lot that goes into that, which we can get into in another episode about the ethics of both moving spirits on and offering. And when I say offering, it's more like, here, I'm gonna do this thing for you without actually like having a discussion about it. Anyways, that's a whole other topic that we can get into another time. But I do need to state that since it's just a common question that I get asked all the time, which is, well, why didn't you do that? I don't know what the belief systems are of the people that run the place. It's a corporation, it's a business. It's not something that you can just be like, "Hi, I'm a psychic, and I sense there's a paranormal activity happening here, and I'm gonna take care of that for you. Pay me." Because that's the other thing is people are saying, why don't you just offer it for free? That's not. There's again, we can get into this in another episode, but. I will say we stopped going to that vet, and it wasn't because of the parasitic entity entirely. We moved, but I haven't been in a very long time, so I'm not sure if it ever went away or what's going on with that. But the other parasitic entity that I ran into was not as intense as the one at the vet, and this is one that is way more common. So there are different kinds of parasitic entities that I've come across. There's all different kinds of shapes and sizes, and they do different things for different reasons, like I was saying at the beginning. And the one at the vet was very, very, very specific and unique to that situation. But this next story is more common and more what I feel people would typically experience. And it's funny because I've talked to other practitioners, I've learned from other practitioners and psychics who have experienced this same exact parasitic entity that I'm about to talk about. So, one night when me and my partner were living at our old apartment, we had parked in a different area than we usually parked. We usually had a little garage space for that apartment complex, but on that particular night, we ended up having to park on the street, which meant that we had to walk through a couple of different apartment complexes to get to ours. And it's just a little garden area that we had to walk through. So we're walking through this garden area at night, and as we're walking, and it's not too dark back there, but it's not like super well lit. So as we're walking back there, not even like 4 feet in front of me, this thing that looked like, and again, when I say looked like, I mean, I saw this thing with my physical eyes. I saw a small black ball of what seemed like smoke or mist quickly, really, really quickly, dart right in front of where I was walking, right across my path. And me and my partner both stopped suddenly because we were really shocked by it. And again, that's how I knew I wasn't the only one to see it because my partner also stopped in their tracks. And we stopped and we kind of took a beat and went, "What was that? You saw that, right? Yeah, what was that?" And then we both went, "Okay, well, it had to be a rat, right?" I mean, it made sense. It was in the garden, it was at night. There were definitely rats in this part of LA. So, we thought, okay, we both clearly saw what we thought was a smoky, misty ball of like black, but maybe it was just a trick of the light. So we quickly wrote it off and thought, you know, okay, maybe it moved too quick to be a rat, and maybe it did disappear into nothing. Like it literally, we could not track where it went because it moved so quickly, and by the time we tried to see where it went to, it was gone. But we were we were trying to convince ourselves it must have been a rat. This was a long time ago. This was before I would tap in and ask questions, and so we just kind of took it at face value. However, as the days went by, I started to see the same exact smoky black ball darting around the inside of my apartment. And again, because this was years ago, and I had not yet gotten to a point of being mindfully aware of these sort of things. Like I saw things, I knew I saw things. My partner had confirmed things for me, but I still hadn't quite reached that point of like, let's be curious, let's ask questions, let's see if it's actually something more than just me. I was very quick to just write it off. And so when I started seeing it in my apartment, I thought, okay, I'm just seeing things. As in, I'm just, it's one of those things where you see something out of the corner of your eye and you're like, yeah, it's nothing. Except One day, my partner asks me, "Hey, weird question, but have you been seeing something dart around on the floors in the apartment?" And that was when I realized, okay, so it's not just me. Okay, so maybe this actually is something else. Maybe this isn't just my imagination because my partner was thinking it was just them as well. They thought it was just their imagination. They thought it was just a trick of the eye. But when they asked me this question and I said, "Oh, are you seeing it like that small black smoky ball?" And they said, "Yes." I was like, "Okay." And I said, "Where are you seeing it?" And my partner listed the same exact spots that I had been seeing it. So not only were we seeing the same exact thing, we were seeing it in the same exact place, but neither of us were fully willing to admit that it may have been something until one of us said something. Because again, I was just at this point where I just kind of wrote everything off. I don't do that anymore. This is a perfect example of why. So I took this opportunity, once I had the confirmation from my partner, I took this opportunity to sort of take a beat, take a pause, take a breath, and I wanted to tap in and see if I could figure out what it was. And when I say tap in, I decided to directly ask this thing, "What are you?" So I sit down, I psychically tap in to see what this thing is, and I confronted it. I said, "Okay, what are you?" And the first response that I got, and when I say I'm tapping in and I'm receiving, I'm talking about receiving through psychic senses. So, see, hear, think, sense, feel, or knowing it to be true. And then a combination of those things kind of becomes the psychic uh, message that I'm receiving. So, when I tapped in and I said, "What are you?" I literally heard in my head in this deep, gravelly voice, "A demon." And when I tell you that I laughed out loud, I really just was like, "Oh, that's cute. That's cute." Because there's no way. The rarity, the extreme rareness. And again, if you have listened to the podcast, if you've listened to the episode with Theron Beyond the Veil, this is actually, I referenced this story in a conversation with Theron. But Theron has even said, as someone who's a medium, as someone who does paranormal investigations, and they've done, I think they said they've done like over 200 or something. And not once have they come across a demon because that's how rare and just unlikely it is to actually have that happen. So when this thing, which by the way, this was years before I talked to Theron, when this thing said a demon, I just laughed because there was no way. I was like, "Sure, no." And I responded, "Sure you are, bud. No, really, what are you? What are you really?" And then the energy shifted, and it no longer was trying to be this big, scary thing that was taking up space. Because when I received the words "a demon," I had this sense of this big energy that was trying to be imposing. It was trying to scare me. It was trying to make me shrink, and I didn't. And so when I clarified again, "Nah, what are you really?" That thing shrank down its energy, and then I could finally sense into it what it really was. And the energy was this tiny, and the only way I can describe it is like a gremlin. Like this tiny little goblin gremlin like energy, and then its voice went from this big scary thing to this like really silly sounding voice, and it said, hungry, hungry," just like that. "Hungry, And I was like, "Okay, all right." And so I was finally able to really figure out this thing's just a parasitic entity. It's just this little tiny gremlin ball, essentially. And what I came to understand was, that night where we ran into it, when we crossed paths with it, It essentially just kind of became like a hitchhiker. It hopped a ride on us and came right in. And this was, again, this was before I was really well practiced and well versed in like protection magic is such a big thing for me now. And it was something I was aware of but wasn't actively engaged with as much years ago. And so this thing could just easily slip into our place because we didn't have the proper like protections in place to prevent that from happening. We don't have that issue anymore. But it was able to just kind of hitch a ride and slip right into our place and just was hanging out and trying to feed off of our energy and try to just get that out of us, whatever it was, whether it was fear or just our energy in general, just draining us. And so once I had the full picture, I promptly kicked its butt out and I told it, you can't come back in here. You're not allowed here. Like, take your BS, go elsewhere. So there are ways to handle these things, right? It doesn't have to be so scary. And even if they try to make you think that they're scary, even if they try to project this energy of being imposing or scary, you can hold space for your own empowering energy and be like, no, 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 no. I'm empowered enough to have the know-how to take care of this. I know that I don't have to tolerate this. I know I can have boundaries. I know I can kick this thing out. I know I can kick this thing out and I can tell it to never come back. So, if you've listened to past episodes, especially the episode on what it was like growing up in a haunted home, then you've already heard me talk a little bit about this idea of a PK manifestation that turned into kind of like this parasitic egregore situation. And I'm not going to get into the details of that again. You can go check out that episode. But that thing fed and grew off of fear in that household. So it was creating situations within the home and acting as a haunting to generate the fear that it needed to feed. And while this little smoky ball was not actively engaging to create the energy that I wanted to feed, because it wasn't that intense of a parasitic entity, it was more like a cockroach. To be completely honest, it was literally just like a cockroach versus this thing that I grew up with, which had been built and created and then sustained off of fear for so long, it became quite a scary thing for a lot of us. And it was to the point where it was actively generating its own energy by getting reactions from us. So, and that was also something that I kicked out, that I told it to leave, that I said, you need to get out of here. You can't be here. It's not okay. And I cleansed it, released it, banished it. Overall, if you're taking anything from these stories, overall, parasitic entities are more of an annoyance than anything to really be afraid of. They can try to scare you. They can try to make you think that there's something really big, bad, and terrible based off of your fears and your projections. They will try to turn that around on you. But in reality, they're just something that kind of needs to be swept out the door from time to time. It can happen to the best of us. They're kind of like when you step in gum when you're outside and you accidentally track that gum into your home and you didn't even realize it until you get home, and then there's gum on the carpet and there's gum on the wood and then you gotta scrub everything down. Yeah, it's an annoyance to clean up. Yeah, it's frustrating that it happened, but that doesn't mean that you can't take care of the situation and easily clean it up and get rid of it, right? So if we start treating parasitic entities like gum on the bottom of your shoe that you accidentally brought into the home, or mud on the bottom of your shoe that you accidentally tracked into the home, when we start seeing them more like that, they become a lot less scary. They become a lot less intimidating. And there's many different ways to remove parasitic entities as well as prevent them from even coming in. Like I mentioned earlier, back when I lived at that apartment and I didn't have the best shields or wards, that little smoky ball of parasitic entity was able to easily get in because I didn't really put the proper protections in place. You know, it's the lock and key mechanism that we want with our shields and wards to make sure that these things don't come in so we don't have to deal with the cleanup afterwards. And even if you do have to deal with the cleanup, it's not something that's going to be out of your control. And if you feel like it is something that's a little beyond you, that's okay. There's plenty of practitioners who can assist you with that. Protection magic, shields and wards, cleansing yourself, cleansing your space, and doing these things regularly can easily prevent these things from happening and remove these things from being around. But again, let's start looking at parasitic entities as a minor annoyance, as something that we can easily clean up and remove, even if it is frustrating to do. The most important thing is that you remember that you have the power to send those things packing. You have the ability to say, no, you're not welcome here, and you can easily remove them yourselves. And like I said, if you don't feel comfortable, you can always reach out to a practitioner for help. So, I hope you found this episode spooky and bizarre. I hope that you also feel a bit more empowered with your magical workings against parasitic entities and know that you do absolutely have the power to overcome these things. Hope you all have a magical Halloween and Samhain. I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me in the parlor for this episode. If you want more psychic magical tips, make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Fantasma Witch. Fantasma Witch. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon, where I have a Discord community. I do Q&As, live classes, workshops, and more. To book a reading or consultation directly with me, you can go to my website, www.phantasmawitch.com. All of these links can be found in the episode description. And please, if you enjoyed this show, make sure you go leave a rating, leave a review, share it with others. It really helps the show to reach new listeners if you take a moment to do that, and it is sincerely appreciated. Shout out to the artist Cat Lines, who helped me to redesign the podcast logo to the beautiful magical teacup you see today. See you, mystical friends, in the parlor next time.